Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human. Welcome to Journey of an Aesthete. You're on the show.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the show. Mainly, of course, your time and generosity, because it's I'm going to do a little blurb up front if you don't mind. But there are, I had many kinds of guests on my show. Some guests are famous. Some guests are less well known, and then there are guests who I've never met. I only know their work. And then there are guests like our current guest now, Alexandra Carter, who I know personally, right? I believe I met you in 2008, 9? When was it?
No, I think we met in 2004 when I started interning at the Mills Gallery.
The Mills Gallery. Thank you. I needed you on the show to sort of fix my brain and get the linear chronology. Right. But I mean, for many reasons, you're on the show because you're an excellent painter and you've had an unusual life. We could talk about your journey, not just in paint, but also how you grew up, and where you've lived and all that. So do you mind doing a little biographical journey? And we talk about, so in 2004, you would have been in your 20s, I imagine, right?
I was 19. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
At that time, I don't think I knew that I knew you were interested in art in the Mills Gallery, and I knew that you painted, but I don't think I knew anything about your farm background. Do you mind? Well, starting wherever you feel like starting, talking about your.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. I feel like because I was so close to it then, and I was still basically living on the Cranberry farm, I didn't recognize it yet as being such a big part of my identity. But it was once I really moved away that, and being kind of separated from it, I realized how different it was from most people. And I grew up on a cranberry farm in Kingston, Massachusetts, which is kind of close to Cape Cod, right next to Plymouth, really. And that is actually where cranberries began, basically. That's where the first cranberry vines were found and harvested, and they're indigenous to North America. It's the only, you've heard of cranberries probably in Scandinavia and in Russia, but those are actually a whole different species. It's the Vaccinium macrocarpon is the American cranberry, and it's a large cranberry. It's very different from European cranberries. And so I grew up with my father and his brother running this small farm, which really, it's really like when they told me when I was a kid that we lived on a farm, I was like, that's not true, because we didn't have farm animals. We didn't have your typical trappings of a farm, but it was a farm. They were working growers of this very specific plant. And, it is really, it revolves around mechanics, really. And my father is a mechanical engineer, and it was all about kind of the machinery that harvested these berries. And it was the year-round maintenance of that machinery, and then kind of the year-round combating of the seasons to keep these berries good and alive for when they're harvested in the fall. And my life kind of revolves around that sequence of growing seasons and harvest seasons.
Do you mind if I ask you? Hold that thought. I want to ask you some technical questions because I'm far from an expert on horticulture or agriculture or any of that. But when you say the very first cranberry cultivation, what are you talking about? In what period of human history? With this big?
Not that long ago, and of course, the indigenous cultures were using cranberries for a long time, but they weren't commercially harvested until maybe like 200 years ago, maybe 300 years ago. But I think it was more 1800s.
Well, the 1700s, right? I would think.
Yeah.
So that's so. Yeah. So the farming that you were experiencing, it goes back to that, I guess, that era. And I guess I was wondering, as far as fruit goes, there's certain fruit I really like, and there's certain fruit I don't. I mean, I really love cranberries. I love I love nectarines and plums. I tend to like more sour fruit. So of course I'm going to like cranberries, right? It's like kind of like a pomegranate, as opposed to the more sweet fruit. But you were, I guess, when you were a little girl, were you alongside doing this kind of work in the was it like a farm, right? It was a farm, and so there were mechanical things having to do with. Does it have to do with preserving the fruit or protecting it, or what? Explain a little bit more about what that entailed, or what did.
Sure. Like the way that cranberry farming basically works is cranberries grow on a vine the same way that like grapes do, but they're completely kind of ground ridden. They don't grow up on trellises the way that you see in vineyards, but they're kind of in plots that way. And so these old cranberry bogs is what they're called, which is what my father kind of invested in. These that have been around for a long time. They're kind of like these chain linked areas of cranberry bogs. And the way that it works is that when it's a dry kind of marshy area that have these like kind of ditches all around. And during harvest season, what they do is they flood those bogs with water. And they're kind of in like a recessed area. And then they go in with these machines. These are like probably some of the most important machines involved, which are cranberry pickers. And they kind of comb the berries off of the vines. And because the berries have air in them, I don't know if any of you, if you've bit into a raw cranberry, but it's got these 4 air chambers in it. So they float on the surface of the water. Once that water, so that's the whole reason for flooding is it makes it easier to gather the berries. And that's the industrial way of doing it. There are dry harvested cranberries, and so that's like hand picked. And that's what you get in bags when you buy them in bags, because that way they don't get like beat up and whatnot. But almost all cranberry production goes towards juice. Like there's only a very small amount of it that goes to like selling whole. So that's how it's kind of it's like
it's mostly liquid and juice. That's the So I think would it be fair to say that you were learning like a family business at that time when you were a little kid, or you were, on that farm?
Somewhat. I mean, my dad, he never like put any pressure or expectation for any of us to kind of take on the business. And thankfully now, like my father's not around anymore, but my uncle is, and my cousin is kind of the one who's taking care of what is left. I mean, the cranberry business went through a whole kind of economic great crisis, and there was overproduction, and small growers like my father and my uncle kind of got screwed over in a way, and they had to sell a lot of their land in the end. So they did really well with it for like a while, for my whole childhood. But once I was a teenager, it wasn't doing that well anymore. So it wasn't like this, like the glorious thing that kind of it was when I was growing up. And
so you felt personally this economic change having to do with the nature of the market for the crop and your familial experience of that. So you must have felt that change.
Yeah.
When did you, because I'm looking, I can tell you what I'm standing in front of right now, and it's really extraordinary. is the Amazons with the legs, the feet coming out of the. I mean, I'm just looking at these at some of your paintings here. When did you first realize that you had the interest to paint or to do the kind of work like you came to do as an adult and later on?
Yeah, from like as long as I can remember. I mean, I was surrounded by people doing what they loved doing. Like my dad, his job, like he loved it, and he loved like solving problems with machinery, and he loves the fact that he didn't put on a tie and drive into Boston every day. He always bragged about that to me. And so it was like kind of like it was very encouraged for me to follow whatever I found to float, to get my juices flowing. And my mother was, she was always a very art kind of driven person, and she had her own kind of small business doing decorative painting, like in people's houses and stuff. So she always had like a little studio, and I was exposed to that from day one. And that gave me all the materials and the space that I needed to kind of just explore that. And, she put me in some painting classes when I was very young. And so I was able to really hone my technique when I was really quite young. And so by the time I got to college, it was I was very comfortable technically. So that was the time to really explore conceptually what I was working on.
So I guess I would have met you 2004 and you would have been 19. So that was the college period.
Yeah.
And were you working at the Mills Gallery?
Yeah, I was an intern there. I was a volunteer. Yeah.
I used to hang out there and go to all the shows, and I remember Adria Rain and other people were there, and I have a kind of fond memories of that time. It's just, but you had your own journey, and did you know while you were at Mills that this is what I want to do? You were already absolutely committed to painting. Talk about that journey to Mills, that period, sort of before, I guess, 16, 17, 18. Are you? I'm sure the nature of work is different, because I'm looking right now at Primavera, which is really, you did in 2020. It's really beautiful. The ball and so the hands, and so that I'm going to guess without knowing that this is probably very different than the stuff you were doing, say, 20 years ago, or.
Absolutely.
So talk about a little bit your evolution of style and changes and interests and whatever comes to your mind. It doesn't have to be what I think, or in terms of that period.
Yeah, when I started painting, it was really all about like trying to learn how to render things, how to make representational images, and I just loved the process. And I was always drawn to the figure, really. I loved narrative imagery. So once I was in high school, so I went to boarding school, actually. So I was living in New Hampshire, not too far from Massachusetts. But
may I ask what school?
At Phillips Exeter Academy.
Oh, you went to Phillips Exeter?
Yeah.
So that explains probably this big show coming up there, right? Isn't there a retrospective?
Yeah, that's the link for sure.
Well, that's amazing. I looked at that and I thought, I wonder if you seem like actually like you could have attended there. So my intuition was on about that. But I hadn't located that particular school. But going to a school like that must have been very. Well, talk about that. I mean, it's a very particular milieu, right? It's a very
right. Oh God, that could be a whole podcast on its own.
Well, you might explain it's kind of like going to the oh God, what was that school? I saw a Harvard film. When I was a member of the Harvard Film Archive for 25 years. And I would go to free screenings and meet people, and there was a film. It was like a special private school for girls. It's very famous. And someone made a documentary about it. And it was like the L School. It was a very short name. You probably know it. It's in New England. A lot of famous people have gone there. People of note. I mean, I don't know what made me think of that, but I saw a documentary about that. But
yeah, I don't know.
Talk about what Phillips Exeter, what you gleaned from that, or what, how it changed you or didn't change you, or
well, yeah, it gave me this like sense of independence that I really needed. It was basically like going to college, but just going there a little bit younger. And I think I needed that time to kind of like find my own identity apart from the Cranberry farm, apart from my parents. And I was just always one of those kids that just wanted to live at school and always be learning something. And so that was actually the first time I was actually talking to my teacher, my Exeter art teacher this morning.
Oh, really?
She's in that show with me. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And she's amazing. Barbara Jenny. And yeah, she's awesome. And she was one of the people that first kind of pushed me to be like, okay, so you can paint. So what are you going to paint about? And like, what's the point of all this kind of, and finding a way to make more meaningful images. And I think that's kind of what I left Exeter. Like that was one of the biggest assets that Exeter had for me was my relationship with her and how she mentored me and pushed me and gave me some kind of confidence. Whereas like in terms of other academics, I kind of like, I left more confident and less because I was around such incredibly brilliant people there that I felt pretty stupid, but also I was kind of keeping up with them. And it was like, I love that environment of like pretty rigorous academic craziness, but it's also like it can be pretty toxic. So,
I mean, I went to Interlochen Arts Academy.
Yeah, I think I remember talking to you about that. Yeah.
We did discuss it, but Interlochen had there's similarities, of course, to Phillips Exeter, but it's also much, much, much more liberal than Phillips Exeter, I would imagine, in many respects. But talk about there's a downside to Phillips Exeter, right, too? I'd imagine.
Well, yeah, that would be it. I think there was not much emphasis on the arts there. It was very, very much, general academics type school. I mean, they had a gorgeous art building, but I felt like there was not much life going on within it. There was a lot of life in, the science building and on the sports field. And so that was something I was always like fighting for. And I did feel dragged down, I think, by everything else that I had to live up to while I was there and academically. And but I think that's really like the downside is it was just really difficult for me. It was difficult to try to make art and also meet all the academic needs, like taking foreign language and science. Science was never my good subject, which is so funny because I'm married to a scientist. Yeah.
Talking about, not to get too far off topic, but one of the reasons I had you on the show was precisely your commitment to representation in the figural, and also kind of what you do with that, which to me seems unique. So I just wanted to make sure before I forget, that was one of my motivations. So it's funny you were talking about that you've figured out you didn't want to be, follow abstraction and didn't want to do necessarily what the avant-garde was at that time, right? You wanted to do figural. And so I guess that would have been when you found your mojo or your métier, your style, right? Would have been then, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I feel like it wasn't until way later, like, 15 years later, like once I was in graduate school, that I even considered kind of like losing the figure or focusing on other things. And I tried that for like a year and it was, you know, I always go back to the narrative power that the human body can have. It's just that resonance.
It's amazing. And I really feel that the art should continue to do that. I certainly don't think that's the only kind of art, far from it, but I think it's important. And I'm glad you're doing it. And of course, as you know, some of your more recent work seems to flirt between abstraction and representation. There's a little bit of an overlap, wouldn't you say, somewhat?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I try to let the medium take over a little bit, and that's where kind of the abstraction comes in, I think.
Mm-hmm. You use cranberry juice in your painting, right?
That's kind of like, it's like a separate vein of work, I think. It's another series. Like most of my hours, I think, are spent on these acrylic ink on drafting film paintings. And then I do have this like other line of work that's like small pieces on antique linens and done with cranberry juice.
Those are beautiful. I mean, because those of course are. I'm very impressed with the paper doilies and if that's what they are. That's it's really good. It's really good. That's a side of your work I would not have known had I not visited your website, which I highly recommend. Your website is really well maintained, and it's a good representative of what you do.
Thank you.
What was the period? And I know that you said that you did a lot of travel, Finland, and then college. So what? Talk about that transition from Phillips Exeter to sort of doing it all over again, because it's like high school is college, right? So was it in New
York,
or was it?
Yeah. So I like when I met you, I was going to Leslie in Cambridge, Boston. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And yeah, it was great. But I really needed to get farther from home. And I loved living in Boston. But, and so I ended up going to Rhodes College, which is in Memphis, Tennessee.
Wow.
And then to just kind of rattle off, there's all these little kind of pinpoints on the map that for me are important and kind of tell the story of how I got here. But so I went from Memphis back to New England after college. And then I spent 1 year in Baltimore. I did a 1-year graduate program at Maryland Institute College of the Arts.
Yeah.
And then I went to Los Angeles kind of on a whim and spent a year and a half there. And that's when I met my husband.
Wow.
And I worked.
I'm sorry, what year would it have been you went to Los Angeles? Because I only discovered
2012.
2012, yeah. I was actually visited there 12 and 13, so that's interesting. I love Los Angeles. I've had many Los Angeles-based artists on my show, and we always talk about how we feel that Los Angeles gets unfairly, misunderstood a little bit. And it's a great city. And beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
As is Memphis, for that matter, or Baltimore. They're all different, but what was your feeling when you first got to Los Angeles, or what was your feeling when you got to Tennessee and Rhodes? That must have been a very unusual change, right? It must have been.
Definitely. I mean, I was a New England girl. Yeah. I hadn't seen like a city that was called a city, but felt more like spread out. Like I was so used to the congestion that we have in our New England cities. And
I think that's what a city is.
Yeah.
I've had actual non-physical fights with people here that I live saying, you do not live in a city. I'll tell them, why do you call this a city? And they're like, well, it's technical. Just the technical term is that you just call it a city because everything is a city that's not, that's not like a town without running water or outhouses, right? Then if it's not that, then it's city. But these don't seem to me at all like cities at all. They're like big suburbs that they just attach the word city to it. Anyhow, that's my own. Sorry to get me there.
I know. I agree. Yeah, so that's what it felt like when I got there. But then also it felt a lot like Exeter, to be honest, because the school was the exact same size.
Interesting.
It was this enclosed campus, which was beautiful. And so now when I think about my Exeter friends and my Rhodes friends, it's interesting because like sometimes I get them a little mixed up. Although I have to say, like the student body at Exeter was much more diverse, and whereas Rhodes was more like very Southern. Great people, but it was very much more specific to that area. And
it was more to be polite about it, I would say it was a little more homogenous, right?
Yeah,
more homogenous, which that was something
for sure. And then I think my most diverse academic experience came from grad school, which was in London. So then there were just like countries from, everyone from all the European countries were there and then beyond. So that was really nice.
Do you mind talking for a few minutes about coming to London for the first time, or England, and what years that was, and what your experience was that? Because British culture has its own, just as they have, as you know, they have their own culture of acting and theater. They also have their own culture of art teaching, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Your experience of that when you first got there, what was London?
Right. Well, I was like totally overwhelmed by London being such a big, I was coming from LA, so it wasn't that crazy, but it just being such a different culture and having so much more history, I loved it. I loved it from day one. And, but it was very intimidating, especially in Goldsmith so this very high concept, kind of high theory, graduate school of fine art. And so I was constantly like really, feeling inadequate in my kind of theoretical backing. Although I think in the long run, I wasn't. I'm interested in that stuff, and it's just not my, like, whereas like rendering and painting it comes easy to me. The theory and all of the reading and that is much,
Well, hold that thought. I just want to ask you a question about that, a very concrete question. So I'm somebody who is trained in theory and history, that part of it, but I can't paint worth a damn, as I can't draw. So I don't have the skill that you have. You can paint, but I'm just interested. Not all artists who are visual artists care about theory, and some of them are hostile towards it. And then there are others who are interested in it, and you're sort of the latter, right? You're sort of somebody who wanted to become acquainted with that. It was not opposed to it necessarily, right?
Absolutely.
But you felt surrounded about it. And when you say surrounded by it, do you mean like a culture where you have to read Hal Foster's book, you have to read Fred Jameson's book, Rosalind Krauss, that kind of art theory? Yeah. Or even like bigger, headier,
of course I can't think of any. Well, a lot of Deleuze. A lot of
Guattari, right?
Yeah. Stuff like that.
1,000 Plateaus and Anti-Oedipus and
stuff like that.
And
so
yeah.
And I am glad that I was in that kind of culture because it pushed me to be more comfortable there and more kind of have my eyes more open to that. And it also intimidated me at first, for sure, because I think it's much more part of British art curriculum to read all that stuff than it is over here. I think over here it's more Rosalind Krauss, that kind of stuff. Whereas over there it's like deeper, not just art specific stuff.
Well, it's curious because their art departments are like our English departments. And then interesting, English departments are sort of closer to what you're describing. The art, it's almost like it's an interesting. It's interesting the cultures of nations and what they teach or don't teach or what they're right. Because a lot of the theories you describe are very Francophile, come out of France, right?
Right, that's true.
And the irony, of course, is that traditionally England was very anti-French thought, anti-continental. they were more analytic, scientific philosophy, right? And very suspicious of anything. So it's almost like there was a flip flop. You said that when you were there, they were more friendly towards ideas from France or ideas from the continent, like they. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting shift, isn't it, in the culture of them? Mm-hmm. What do you attribute that shift to? Is it just what the teachers, when they grew up, what they were into, and then they went on to teach it, or just any ideas you have about what that might be? Or
I have no idea. Yeah. I think just compared to over here, it's just much more ingrained. There is like a kind of, it's not just like academic intellect. It's just everyday cultural knowledge. It's just cooler to know about that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's prized, or it's respected, and it's right. It's something that. How is your painting starting to change when you're at Goldsmith? I mean, I know that things are happening in your painting. What do you? Yeah,
a lot of things. It was interesting because I was coming from a year of working in LA for a sculptor. I was assisting a sculptor there, and so I was kind of I had hands-on, very tactile and very highly attended to work. Like the surface of these sculptures was very meticulous and beautiful. And then I went to Goldsmiths, where it was like the opposite kind of culture. It was more minimalist, more conceptual, more pared down. And that's kind of what happened to my work. Was I went from a place of kind of wanting to do sculpture or wanting to do make objects. I mean, I have to say, like, as an artist, I am so influenced by the culture around me and by the work that's being made around me. And I like to make work that speaks to whatever that kind of cultural language is. So in grad school, it was really pared down and more minimal. And I went through kind of crisis there, as a lot of people do in MFA programs, where they get their work very challenged. And I definitely was challenged as one of the few kind of people working in a very traditional medium. Mm-hmm. So I went through this phase of dropping the figure from my work and seeing what happens with that. And that was interesting. I mean, it kind of, the work was very much about, kind of went in and out of being about cranberry farming at that time and reflecting on that time. And so I was painting these paintings of like the machinery that littered the landscape I grew up on and the landscape itself.
Guess what I'm looking at right when you mentioned that sentence? I'm looking at The Life, 2011. You know the drawing.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Isn't it amazing that I flipped to that? I'm looking as soon as you started talking about mechanical machinery and the ones. Yeah, so that's I think that's it, right?
Right.
The Life.
Yeah, exactly. That whole that gallery on my website called the Mechanics of Fluids is kind of that. It's that vein of my work. It's kind of the one that's more about the industrial and the farming and the landscape, kind of not just about using the berry kind of within the body, but using that place of where I grew up.
But when we get to Ophelia and Ophelia 2, that's shades of what's to come, right? That's almost like future Alexandra Carter, which I like very much. It's almost like you're forming your own style, right? Your own who you are.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like eventually, it took me a while, but I started using the berries in like kind of reclaiming them within the female body and feminizing them in a sense.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about your maternal or feminine turn in your work or those concerns?
Yeah, sure.
Is that what is most recent, or is that older? What period? I guess that would be after.
Yeah, I'd say that's the most recent.
Recent. So obviously that would be after Britain.
Yes.
So where were you living at that time when there was this change in your work, and is it reflective of things you're going on in your life? I imagine, right? Things you're experiencing. And,
yeah, absolutely.
Your consciousness. You want to talk about that? That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was after moving back to the States from Europe, because I had been making, kind of like using the female body in these edgy kind of ways, like depicting the body kind of exploding out of itself. I had always been interested in that, and always been interested in the ideas of the womb and the female body, not as a vessel, but like as a birthing body. And I say birthing as in like procreating, but also like something that expels something, the kind of base aspects of the body. And when I moved back here, I was in this life stage where I'm, starting to think about my own fertility, starting to think about my own, like making a family. And, I pretty quickly ran into some fertility problems. And so in kind of like meditating on all of that and processing all of that, I was meanwhile just thinking about images of motherhood and images of the lactating body, and thinking about the word fertility in terms of that body, but also in terms of land, in terms of agriculture. And so suddenly the cranberries were back in the work quite quickly, and very literally, like the berries themselves becoming part of the body, using them in place of breath, using them to talk about things of value, things of procreative value in a way. And so like on this residency that I was just in Finland, I wrote the residency proposal 2 years ago. So I was still in the thick of infertility treatment.
Wow.
And my proposal was titled The Fruits of Infertility. So it was really an idea of marrying these two concepts of kind of the language that I grew up in, and how patriarchal actually that language, how patriarchal that culture was actually in a way, and then kind of taking the berry out of that culture, reclaiming it, putting it into this whole new context, but still having that very personal significance of like, this berry is this kind of exalted thing in my life. And I love the way it kind of can play so many different roles in pieces. Like it could be berries, it could be breasts, it could be eggs, it could be other bulbous parts of the body. Like I think you'll see in like really recent work from 2020, I did a bunch of like Paleolithic fertility figures, but kind of reimagined with these berry bodies. And since then, thankfully, my infertility treatment works, and I have a baby daughter.
Yep.
And so now the work is taking this whole, like I've been painting about motherhood for a while, in my head anyways. It wasn't that obvious, but now that I have the actual experience of being that mother, it's like this whole new, I think of it as like ferocity. Or
entity.
Not.
There's a word for
what?
entity. Yeah.
So I think of it as kind of like almost this like monstrous quality, the monstrous mother. And so monsters in general have been appearing more in my work. And I think of it in a good way, like this like aggressive, monstrous mother who's very, not just protective, but like strong.
Well, it seems to me that would come to the matriarch in 2021 with the that painting, right? That series, right?
Yeah, that was really recent. I did that piece just a month ago.
Yeah. Well, so we're sort of up to date. I do want to go back a little bit to Finland. That must have been a change to go to Finland, right, in general.
Definitely.
What comes to your consciousness when you think about Finland and your year there or time there, and how that affected?
A lot of things. I mean, it was really wonderful. It was the best art residency I've ever done, and it was just so supportive. And so what immediately I think of is the other artists I was there with, which were just this amazing team of people working in some way. Their work had some connection to the earth or the land, and so and my work was really the only kind of traditional studio art type of work. But these 4 other artists that were there with me we were able to have such good dialogue because of the way that our work engaged with some kind of natural element. And there we were in the middle of kind of Finnish coastal countryside. It was absolutely jaw-droppingly gorgeous. But we were there in, sub-zero temperatures, very, very cold. So we were hit with kind of the landscape we were in every day quite hard.
Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So you remember very much the cold, the temperature, but also the camaraderie.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You were relating to artists working in a different style, right? So you said you were studio. Do I take that to mean that you were more representational and they were doing abstract or conceptual things, or?
Yeah, conceptual or like writing. Like 2 of them were really working more on writing. One of them was more of a kind of sound or performance artist. So he was making works that were very kind of happenstance, very ephemeral. And another of the artists was working more in a biological way, kind of looking at how her work interacted with people and with biology and ethnobotany. So.
I would think you would have a lot in common with her, though, right? Didn't you find that there was some?
Yeah, we definitely talked a lot. It's just so funny to me because I've never thought of myself as interested in botany or even being that connected to like the land. But it's just like, it's such a part of my core that I don't even really recognize it,
Yeah. Well, you can see it in your paintings. So it seems very evident. It's interesting to me that you were all doing these very different styles, yet sort of in relation with each other, right? You said that you would talk with each other about things. Do you feel that kind of, diversity, do you think that's a new thing in general, that's encouraging, that's happening with artists, that they're putting aside that they're you know what I mean? They're kind of, there's only one way to do.
Yeah, I don't know if it's new, but I think it's definitely... it's the path that I've chosen. Like I've always chosen not to be in groups of painters, but in groups of other art minds, whether those are actual makers or writers, performers. I think art is becoming more multidisciplinary for sure. And I'm not saying painting's dead at all, because I am a painter and I fight for painting till the end. But
well, you're on the show because I want to defend painting. Right?
Being engaged
yeah,
with
exactly.
all the different mediums is the best way to be.
But you're on your friendly relations with other mediums which is important. I'm wondering, what kind of things have you learned from these other mediums? Like, say, in Finland, what were things that maybe wouldn't be evident to an outsider like myself or an observer like myself. And you're like, well, I got that idea in my painting, even though it comes from a totally unexpected place. Are there things like that you can think of that are I don't know if that question makes sense or not, or if I'm expressing myself well, but
having to do with Finland specifically.
Well, having to do with your work changing because of relationship with a different kind of art medium, or somebody doing something not in painting, right? Somebody in sound, or just whatever you think of. Well, that really inspired me, or that, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think what I like about being around those kind of people is that because they're not painters, we don't end up just talking shop about painting. Mm-hmm. And as much as I love doing that, I think what really gets me going more is what the paintings are about, and what these images are about, and what they conjure, and mm-hmm. what kind of reactions people have to them. It's not really mm-hmm. my paintings, as much as like, I know you commented on my like recent, what I've been sharing on social media, being very like, I've been talking a lot about my process, but my paintings are not really about that. You know, they're not about the process. Right. But my process is pretty like, it definitely feeds what they're about.
Yeah.
I just think, I don't know. I think I like being around people with all different kind of levels of expertise to bring mm-hmm. to the floor, you know?
Well, you know, when you read something, like, I guess I remarked upon that because I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about, I don't know tempera from paint. I don't say I'm totally ignorant, but that's not something I know about. So to me, it's fascinating to read, you know, an artist talk about that. Even if it's not the most important thing, even if it's, you know, it is interesting to me as someone that doesn't fully understand it, you know, fully comprehend it.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. When I read about other artists and their process, that's why I want to share it, because it's like, oh my God, it's so interesting to me, because you look at images like mine or like a lot of other painters, and not even like mine. There's a lot of painters where you're like, wait, how was this made? Mm-hmm. And it's almost like a secret that the painter keeps from you by not really letting you in on how it was made. And that's why I love hearing about it. But I also love paintings where it's like really clear that it was made in such and such a way, or it was like super fast. Like I love seeing painters who are so good that they can do something super fast and get something across in so few marks. You know, there's a whole realm of kind of levels that you can go to with painting, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind discussing your if you know the work schedule you have, or environment, or how, if you're slow, fast, medium, different times, or what you have to say about that? Because you mentioned you admire people that work fast, and I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, with the regular daily grind, it kind of revolves around the other things going on in my house. But I think using Finland as a good example, because that was kind of like that was 2 months of really focused time where I had more childcare than I normally have. So I was able to focus even more and spend a lot of hours in the studio, mm-hmm. which for me takes form of really a lot of research, a lot of looking at images and kind of gathering images, and then drawing. And whether that drawing takes place on Photoshop or on a big piece of paper. Usually it's a big piece of paper lately. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where the paintings start, and they start from ideas. Like I don't often just start from nothing. Like I usually have some idea and a group of references for each painting. Mm-hmm. And I begin to lay it out in a drawing, and then the kind of the wonderful thing about the medium that I use is that it's a translucent film. So those drawings that I make, they can be kind of crappy because as long as the structure of them is what I want, that's what I use. And then I lay the piece of drafting film over that drawing, and I just use the drawing as like a guide. And then I pull out my ink and whatever else I might be using, and I add a ton of water to them, and I paint them onto that drawing basically. But I put that drawing like behind the piece. And so in the end, I take the drawing away, and there's none of that original kind of architecture of the thought. Now it's like this new piece that's pretty edited down. Usually I don't like follow the drawing perfectly a lot of the time. And I end up, it just gives me a lot of freedom that way, working this way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, when I'm looking at in front of me, the matriarch, anything you want to say about that particular painting or?
Sure. That's a good one. That was that and the other one to the right of it, non-stress test. Those were both kind of pretty, they weren't as involved in terms of like layering and reference images as some of my works can be. Because some works I've used like a type of printing into the work too. I use like image transfers sometimes to include photographic imagery into the painting. And these pieces have none of that. They're just ink on drafting film. And they aren't taken from specific references. A lot of my paintings, I actually take images of myself as reference images. Mm-hmm. But these paintings were kind of totally out of my head. And so those drawings were kind of riffing on the maternal body or the pregnant body or the postpartum body, or on some kind of like maternal image. And so the matriarch, the one that you brought up, I started by just drawing this kind of boulder like giant woman. I thought of her as like a titan, kind of like the titans from ancient Greek myth. And I just thought of her as kind of coming out of the earth. And in the drawing, I ended up making her not coming out of the earth. Like I decided to have her on top of another person, basically kind of flopping over this other body who, like, you just see the back of the head of this other person. And this person's holding up kind of her slubbering body, torso. And she doesn't have any bottom half, which is also the other thing.
That's right.
But she kind of has this odd stare. And
it's remarkable. I mean, the expression on the face is just, I mean, that's unique. That to me, in that painting. That really stands out.
Thanks.
I mean, in general, there are other features of the painting that I see in other paintings, but that face, I can tell that was important that you. And it looks like here, like you have sculptures. So strange legs and self sucker. These of course are older, 13. Do you still do sculpture like that, or was that a kind of a of that period?
Don't.
You don't.
I would be interested in doing it again for sure, because I love how much kind of hand labor goes into sculpture and kind of the idea of bringing something to life. And I did those at a time right after I had been working for a sculptor. And I don't know, the process of making somebody else's work makes you want to make your own work so much. Yeah. Because it's like, I would just come home itching to make my own work. And what I like my hands were used to doing at that point was making 3-dimensional objects. And I was like, oh, I wonder what my work would look like if I tried to make it 3-dimensional. So that's kind of where those two sculptures came from, is me taking like just the same way I would make an idea for a painting, or the same way I made the idea for the matriarchs. The way that I kind of just told you about it was just making some kind of drawing, whether in my sketchbook or in my head, and then trying to execute it however I can.
And then, of course, there's a painting that looks very much like you, or as I remembered you when you were 1920. It's Violent Excess.
Yes.
That looks, I mean, that looks like you, very much like the Alexandra I know, except without the gun, without the revolver, and not the that's cool.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the first times I painted at a larger scale too. And that painting, I mean, it came from like an image I saw in the news of them raiding. Oh God, I'm gonna forget all the names. But in Libya, they were raiding this palace.
Oh.
The military was raiding this palace and posing with this golden mermaid, and I thought that this golden mermaid, contrasted with the gun, contrasted with the interior. It was just too good not to reinterpret in my own way. Absolutely. And it's so funny because when I went to Goldsmith, one of my professors there told me that painting is what got you in, which is interesting.
Well, I guess that's the culture of Goldsmith. That would have been important to them.
Yeah.
Is that kind of, when I say culture, I mean the aesthetic culture, right? Which is very politicized, I'd imagine.
Yeah,
very politically savvy. So I guess a work of art that seems to have a political consciousness about it, or at least that's very, I would say sharp or in front. They would like, you said they'd like that. That was their preference or their
Yeah, well, it's loaded, right? There's something there to talk about for sure.
Right. It's interesting because you have all these other sides to you with the color and the. Do you mind talking about your concept of color because it is unique? I don't know what painting uses as an example. The matriarch that uses, or the non-stress test, the way you blend your colors. Or seated row, which is really something that's incredible. That seated row. I mean, they're just it's unique, and I don't really know. I wouldn't know how to describe it because, again, I don't know the terminology. I don't know much about paint, but you seem to have your own way of making the end colors that you do make. You're blending something there. You're doing some kind of a.
Yeah, well, those are definitely the colors that I love. It's so interesting to me because I always think that I use, like, I paint with like a full palette. Like I try to hit all the different color groups. That's what I think I do. Like not within one painting, but just across all of my paintings.
Okay.
But if you look at them, you'll see there's a lot of warm color palettes, a lot of red.
Ochre. The ochre and yeah, people always comment on that, and it makes me realize, I don't use much of the other colors, but I'm so drawn to those colors that are indicative of life, of the body, and it's just what definitely my hands want to work with. Whereas sometimes I'll challenge myself and say, okay, you can't use any of those colors. And so, like, from what you see on my website, like, I'm just looking now, Mamalia, so like she-wolf painting. And then there's another painting down below called Sheila's Seven Sorrows. And in that one, I really went out of my way to use blues. And because I think that it really, it bolstered the conceptual subject matter of that piece, which was more about some kind of like death or some kind of miscarriage. And I don't say that lightly because I did not go through a miscarriage, but I was so surrounded by so many women that have
And so that piece was really meditating on that in a way, and on the ideas of fertility, like I was talking about formerly. But so I think color is like very conceptual to me, right? It definitely has to support what's going on in the work. But I definitely have my comfort zone for sure. And that's similar to like the matriarch. But I honestly think that the matriarch was also a product of the sunrises in Finland were just the most intense, amazing, like way more intense than a California sunset. The light would just take over the land so quickly, and in this kind of fluorescent, pink, yellow, orange glow kind of quality. So that's, I think, where the palette for those two paintings really...
I can tell you, hearing you describe it makes me want to travel and visit there. I've never been there.
Right.
I would love to look at that. That sounds like really something, especially if it inspired these paintings.
Yeah.
How about the eyeballs in the trapper, or the eyes?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That's an odd one. Yeah, this was at a time when I was in between, I had just finished grad school, and I was figuring out, okay, what are my paintings going to be now? And I was using these image transfers more and more. So this piece came from, it started as just an image transfer. So it was a photograph of these ceramic eyes that were part of the collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not sure of whether they were like classical or what era they came from. But
I think I know the work you're talking about. I think I do.
Really? Yeah.
And it's definitely classical, old.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it started with those eyes. I was just so drawn to them and how simple they are. They're made of this like very, very textured looking, rock looking ceramic really. And kind of putting them in the middle of one of my very non-rock like compositions of ink, which is basically like just a big swath of different ink colors poured into one another, and given a lot of movement, and they're allowed to kind of sit on this drafting film and make this gradation as the pigment kind of separates from the binder and it gets watered down. So you get these textures, and then so there was a lot of that there, but I covered a lot of it with gold leaf.
The gold leaf is really the gold leaf is so important in that work. I feel because of how it offsets the eyes, right? And then so it's very it's beautifully arranged. Everything seems perfect in that work, but what you're talking about, because you have to, if you do one thing, you have to offset it a certain way, right? And you have to,
right.
And I don't know the terminology for that. I mean, I only know it intuitively as an outsider, as an observer, as a fan or appreciator, any of those things. I'm still an outsider. I don't know. You know it from the inside because you do it, but there's
yeah, I think it's kind of part of what I figured out while I was at grad school is kind of some of my tutors and my visiting professors there were really helpful in kind of pointing out sometimes my paintings had too much of the same language going on in it, too much of just that inky, flowy language. And so that's when I started layering these image transfers in there, was because I really liked how it looked to have like a mechanically produced image integrated into that supernatural, super manual painterly style. And then in this piece, for example, like it's further layered with also the gold leaf. So there's even like a greater sense of materiality when that very opaque, flat, but reflective kind of material is added to the surface.
I love hearing you discuss your work. You're so articulate, I think you express really well what you're doing in a way that a listener, an audience can understand and appreciate. I appreciate that you do that, especially important on a podcast like this. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it's like my favorite thing. I love talking about art. I love talking about other people's art, my art. I think it's important. And as an artist, I think, you shouldn't like shirk around talking about it because it's like the basis of your life. And it's really what I'm here for, I hope,
Oh, sure. Do you want to talk about works you're in the middle of now, like in the present, or not discuss that, or anything else? I mean, that's because we're admittedly in an unusual time, or talk more about your own finally giving birth to your own baby, your own.
Yeah, well, I could talk about all of that kind of in one because I think what I'm working on now. So I'm just coming back from this like 2-month period of intense execution. So a lot of paintings were executed during that time. And now I'm formulating new ideas and reflecting more and more. And I think a lot of these recent paintings they're about like this postpartum experience, this experience of giving birth too. And so I've been processing that in the work because I feel like it really complements the longer trajectory of the work and exploring the ins and outs of the female body and what it feels like to be in that body. And what I'm surrounded with now is this postpartum support group that I go to, and the stories from these women are it's such a universal, very gendered, but very universal among women that most women experience this. And yet there are so many angles that aren't talked about, and the discomfort and the pain and the kind of the socialized nature that we hide women's bodies, even though they're always in plain sight. I mean, they are the center of art history and of advertising. But the way that we talk about them has always been so tight-lipped in some ways. And so I think I'm trying to explore
paradox. Yeah, it's a paradox.
That experience.
The paradox of being everywhere, revealed all the time, but also hidden at the same time.
Right.
Or what's hidden is what people don't want to show, right? Which I would guess you're saying is a maternal, is am I right? It's only certain. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts or ideas about.
It's like the maternal body is still a sexual body. The maternal body is still like a woman's body. It's not like this Virgin Mary perfected kind of sexless thing. And so there's that exploration, but then there's also the exploration of like the more intuitive and animalistic kind of qualities of being a mother and being in that body. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really gotten to a place where because I also don't want to reduce it to just the maternal experience. Like that's definitely not the only thing it's about. I mean, there's all this other stuff I've been really into lately, like witchcraft and horror movies and like big, heavy metaphorical stuff visual.
What horror movies do you like? Did you like Somerset or Summer? Did you see it?
I don't know. You mean Midsummer?
Midsummer, yeah.
Yeah, that's like in my very, very top movies for sure. I love the genre of that genre. Yeah.
I went to see Midsummer twice in the theater. Twice, not once. So that tells you that tells you I didn't feel it was a waste of my time. But what do you make of that picture? That was something, huh? What that was? What do you? Any thoughts on that? I don't know why that particular film came to mind, but it seems like something.
Well, yeah, it definitely spoke to my my folklore and fertility heart because it's super, I feel like there's a lot of inferences to not just not Scandinavian folklore, but it almost felt like American in some ways, and like all of these fertility rites and fertility rituals, and the fact that it all takes place in plain daylight. It's amazing how dark it can be while being so beautiful and light.
Yeah, well, it's making a horror film in broad daylight, like having a film noir in sunny California, right? In broad daylight.
Right.
Like Chinatown or something, you know. But I was like you, I was very impressed by that film. What other recent?
Yeah.
Does the Babadook share space in terms of?
Absolutely. And I think I need to rewatch that now that I'm a mother, because there is a definite motherhood element in that movie that I want to kind of reinvestigate. But I think like one of my favorite two recently, and this has to do with New England, is Robert Eggers, his two films, The Lighthouse, and because they have such dedication to history and of place, which I think is so interesting in combination with the witchcraft and or mythological elements that are in those movies.
Well, I didn't know we had this in common. It's fascinating that you, Babadook and Midsummer, that was a really good, 2 years ago, it was a really good period, right, for horror filmmaking. There was a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I just watched this documentary on folk horror, which is really good. I highly recommend it. It's called Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched. Really good documentary, just kind of like strumming away at like all of these kind of rural or folklore embedded horror movies that have come out of the last 50 or so years.
Mm-hmm. I guess, of course, an older example would be my favorite era, the 70s, The Wicker Man, right? So is a
right, yeah, absolutely.
The Wicker Man, of course, is very different in sensibility, style than Midsummer, which is very much a millennial generations type in sensibility, I think. I'm guessing maybe much younger people and maybe generations' feelings about conformity or rules and laws and all that. What else about that? It's interesting. So horror, and what witchcraft are you interested in? Or are you
kind of more like the witch in culture and the way that she's appeared. And I think, well, honestly, part of what got me into even like using the term or whatnot was because of the infertility treatment process. I felt like I was the subject of witchcraft in a way. It just felt like, so I had this like coven of women working on my body, caressing the eggs out of my body, because infertility treatment is so intense, and it doesn't just involve like super hard medical science. There's a lot of things that women do, and this is not like loosey-goosey stuff. My reproductive endocrinologist, who is like renowned in her field, amazing doctor, she said, please go to this fertility acupuncturist. Please take all these supplements. Like, there's so many things that you do to support the process, because you have to do everything that's within your power to make it happen. And so, there I was, sticking myself with needles of hormones, and then going to an acupuncturist who was sticking me with all other kinds of needles.
Well, you said you were close to be, you said, well, it's not loosey-goosey. I mean, I am loosey-goosey. I am a woo person. No, I
like the woo stuff.
I am thoroughly non-scientific. I mean, I believe in astrology, for crying out loud. And I have beliefs that probably most physicists probably would not approve, but I don't know. So I'm very, it's a long way of saying I'm very open-minded to all those things and very interested in it. I mean, I remember meeting Margot Adler, because my father's in our family cosmetics company. I would meet Starhawk and Margot Adler and women involved in some of those ideas. Have you read Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler? Or does that interest you, or is that
No? Yeah. Who is that?
Margot Margot Adler, Drawing Down the Moon? She's a
Oh yeah. I've seen that book. Yeah.
It's a good book. I mean, I got to talk with her, and I got to meet Starhawk once. Of course, that was back in the 80s, and I guess the 80s was a time when people were into that stuff a lot, actually. Then, I don't know, it's kind of different now. I think it's come back, or there's a resurgence. I don't know. I don't really know.
Right.
A lot of people get especially scientifically minded people get very uncomfortable when I disclose those things, because they're often, they're dismissive, or they say, well, that's just hocus pocus, or that's just,
Right. And my husband is definitely that way. But then again, he was involved in that whole infertility process too, obviously. And so he was totally behind whatever we could do. And he also really loves all this like folk horror stuff alongside me. And he's really interested in all of the kind of tropes in that. But yeah, if we bring up astrology with him, he's gonna shut down.
Well, I'm just disclosing that. I mean, of course, it's not about agreement, disagreement. It's just when you're a host of a show, you can't hide yourself, and you have to.
Absolutely.
If somebody that I like Margot Adler, who is a Wiccan priestess and journalist. I mean, there are some people who are going to be fine with me being into her, and other people that will be uncomfortable, right? Or will be, because people have different opinions, right? We live in a pluralistic age where people believe different things, right? Clearly,
right.
I don't know. There's a lot is there anything else that comes to mind that you want to discuss that's important or to you at this moment? Because I know all good things come to an end, and that includes even this episode.
Right.
Is there anything you want to say about your own being a mother, about your own motherhood now, since it's new, and your own painting, or say whatever? Yeah, what do you want to say about it, or what do you?
I mean, it's interesting to me because I feel like part of my realization in this motherhood role is watching kind of what I was talking about earlier, is how we've all been socialized to kind of make light of motherhood and to look at it as this really angelic kind of role. And I think I like to look at the darker side of it, obviously, of this idea of maternal ambivalence.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I feel like my path thus far has been quite joyful. It's been quite the baby that I've had. She sleeps through the night. She's a very good baby. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't, although I did have a really awful journey with breastfeeding, where I had set myself up that I was just going to be this major badass breastfeeder, and it's going to be like the way that I fed my child. And then it turned out that everything that I couldn't do anything more than I did. I tried everything to breastfeed, and my body wouldn't make the milk. And it's probably related to why I had infertility. I'm not sure. No one's sure. But that definitely affected the first round of work that I was making right after giving birth. Was like, I went from this fascination and reverence of the female breast to kind of this very, very double-sided relationship with it, where I was angry at mine and at my body, and at kind of just having that feeling of loss, of losing that aspect of what would have been part of this journey with this baby. Mm-hmm. But since then, I feel like that was a blip in time in a way. But it definitely affected my work, because I would talk about kind of those aspects of lactation in depicting the breasts or the berries are all the more powerful to me now. Like I've painted a lot about breastfeeding before and after. So it's, that was like an interesting aspect of my journey since then. But now kind of settling into this rhythm that I have now with a 9-month-old baby.
Yeah.
Now it's just kind of coming to terms with what the rest of her life is going to look like within mine, and how it's just like a constant, it's a constant transition, right? Like they grow so fast that there's like, you can't really like settle into any one stage.
Yeah. That's very beautiful. Do you mind me asking when she was born, the month of her birth?
Yeah, it was April 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, and she came like 2 weeks late, and so it was like one of the most anxiety-filled times of my life, because there I was. I had gone through infertility. It took me so much and so long to get pregnant, and then I was pregnant, and I felt like I was pregnant forever, and that this baby was just never going to come. Because what infertility does to your brain and to your mentality is so intense. I never understood before I went through it. The just level that it can bring you to depression, to despair, because of how much you're trying to get something and how little control you feel you have over it is just so intense. And so it filled my entire pregnancy with kind of disbelief in a way. Like I couldn't believe it was happening. So there was like almost I was really happy to be pregnant, and I was really treating my body with total respect and being super, not just healthy, but like doing all the research that I could in terms of like, how should I treat my body right now so that the baby like has the best birth and the best early life. At the same time, I was like, I don't think this baby is ever going to come. Like, this is just a mirage. It's a very weird experience. And especially when we got to that last 2 weeks, it was just like, okay, I'm just not going to expect that this is going to happen anymore, because it's just like, it's almost a tease. But then she finally came, and it was wonderful. So,
well, that's good news. I mean, I'm happy that she did, of course. And of course, I know that your paintings in the future will bear the mark of that experience, right? Still, right? So you're gonna, you speak so eloquently about your infertility, and also eloquently about, I guess, what it did to your brain and your consciousness, and of course that's going to reflect in your painting. I think kind of like any artist, right, makes something that comes out of their own. I guess all works of art do have a bit of autobiography in them, wouldn't you say? Whether it's a poem or painting or...
Yeah, and that's always like something that I've been kind of waffling in terms of like, how much of that do I tell? And it was just recently kind of in the Finland residency, I gave a presentation where I asked for feedback on that, and it was like a resounding kind of, yes, share the personal, at least amongst the audience I had there. And it's interesting because sometimes people are very, oh no, TMI, don't tell me everything about the painting.
Yeah.
And I totally get that too. Like, there's a sense of mystery and that people like to maintain so that they can project their own experience onto, paintings. But
unless they're
if you want me to talk about them, I can talk.
Unless they're unfortunate enough to be on Journey Even Sleep podcast and somebody wants to hear about that, all that stuff. I hope you don't mind sharing it. I've really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed the beauty and the eloquence, and also that you went into the weeds on all this. And I'm very
thank you. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it too. Absolutely.
I'm very thankful, and I hope you keep us posted on when you complete a new work, and your future ventures, and how your little girl's doing, and anything.
I will.
Else. So thank you very much, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Mitch. It was so good to talk to you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mm-hmm. I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.